We'll be discussing. Yeah. So today we'll be discussing about constructors. Okay. So are you able to see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we saw that what is class and what is object. How do we create the object? So we have a syntax of creating the object is like class name, and we have a reference variable, and then we use a new keyword, and then we have a class name along with the open and close parentheses. Okay. So open and close brackets. So here you'll see that this is nothing but the constructor. Okay. So how do we create the object? This is one way, but we have discussed the other ways also. But the thing is like now here we are using the constructor. Okay. So constructor is a block of a code. So it's like a block of a code which has a class name. Okay. Which has a class name as like a name of that particular block. For example, this is like whatever we are defining this as like a constructor. Okay. So it has a block of a code. Here we can write any statements that we want. Okay. And what is the use of constructor? Why do we need this constructor? So in class, we have some instance variables. Okay. So instance variables. So instance variables to initialize the instance variables. Okay. When do we initialize the instance variables? You see, there are two ways that we can do. One is like we can directly, create the object with help of like object that I'm going to call, and I can assign the values to the instance variable. That is one way. The other way is like we can still use the methods. Okay. We can still use the methods and we can assign the value to that instance variable. But constructor, what does it do is like during the creation of the object itself, it's going to help us to initialize the instance variables. Okay. The main motto of creating the constructor is to initialize the instance variables, not to create the object. This is a part of creation of the object. Okay. So constructor is part of creation of the object, but when does this object gets created is like whenever it sees a new keyword. Okay. So new keyword, whenever we have the new keyword or new instance, in that case, what it does is like it's going to create the object. But constructor is like it will help you. Like that's nothing but whenever we are creating any object, so we have to follow. Generally, this is like the first approach that we are going to follow. Okay. So what is that? Class name, reference variable, new keyword, and the constructor. Okay. So what is the use of constructor? Generally, interest they are going to ask you about like what is the use of constructor. Constructor is used to initialize the instance variables. Okay. So you initialize the instance variables. So that is the first motto. And the second thing is like if you are not creating constructor, okay, there are some conditions that we'll discuss about like how do we exactly create the constructor. What if I create the constructor, what does this JVM does? Okay, all these things we are going to discuss about it. But initially we'll go and try to create a sample program. In that we'll see how do we initialize the instance variables. Okay. Constructor. I'm just creating a package for this constructor. Okay, so constructor, let's take example. Let's rename his name. Okay, so inside this, I'm going to have something like string name, age, string location. Okay, so now I got this things. Okay, so to initialize this, these are the instance variables that we call, right? So what do we do here is like we are going to have a main method. in this main method, I'm going to create okay, so this is called, we have two types of constructors that we call is like default constructor and others like parameters constructor. So this is a default constructor. This does not have anything inside it. Okay, so we are not passing any kind of a parameters. But how do I initialize this instance variables now? So there is like I need to create a parameters constructor, and here I'm going to pass it as like string name. Let's name it as like name int age string location. Okay, so here I need to assign these values. Okay, is equals to name. This is equals to age and location. Location is equal to this. Now you get a error here. Okay, it's saying that you have a default constructor. You have a default constructor defined here, but you have a parameters constructor that you have created. Okay, you need to pass the parameters here. So name, age, location. Okay, now you see I've created a constructor with some parameters in it. Okay, so now what it does is like it's going to, so just I'm creating a method public void display details. Okay, so let me put this console. I'll undock it. Okay, I'm creating some method here. So this method is like name age location. Okay, so I've created a constructor, parameters constructor here, and then I'm passing these values here. Okay, so now I'm going to call this method with the help of an object. Here we can see this. Okay. Okay. Now you can see what I did here is like I've created a small program to demonstrate the constructor along with the parameters. Okay, I'm passing these parameters. Now see what is how I'm going to initialize the instance variable is like during creation of the object itself, I'm just passing them as like a parameters. Okay, so this is nothing but the constructor. The use of the constructor is to initialize the instance variable. Okay, so this is called a constructor. Another thing is like we have some conditions for creation of the constructors. So what are those conditions we'll discuss about? Okay, so and the constructor there, just give me a second, guys. Yeah, guys, I'm back. Okay. So there are two types of constructor. So what are those two types of constructor? One is like default constructor. Another one is like parameterized constructor. Okay. So default constructor will not have any parameters passed in it. Okay. Just to define a constructor, for example, here we need to create a constructor. Object runs one. Okay. So for this, so here default constructor. Okay, when you execute this program, you see it says like default constructor. We don't have any parameters in it. So just we are creating a constructor. Inside that we have this statement. Okay. So this is default constructor and this is parameters. Okay. Let us see another example. So this is very important, guys. So in interviews, they are going to ask you this set of questions. Okay. So constructor example 2. Now I'm just going to create a main method. Runs is equals to main constructor. Earlier you saw some error, right? So when I'm just creating a constructor here, I don't want to define this, okay? So I'll just make it like, when I just comment this code, you see there is a error. But here I'm doing the same thing, right? I'm just creating a constructor, but I'm not getting any error. Okay. So generally what happens internally is like, if you're not creating any constructor, okay, by default, JVM will create a constructor. So see now, I don't get any error when I have this constructor created. Okay, so this is nothing but this is optional. Okay, whenever you are creating any object and you have a or followed by a constructor, so here what happens is like by default, if JVM looks into this set of code, what it does is like if you're not creating any constructor, if you are not creating any constructor by default, it will create the constructor. And the other thing is like, for example, now we have something called some A. Okay. Now here you're trying to assign this value to this one. So what it does is like it's going to throw the error because you have defined the constructor, parameters constructor, but you are not passing the parameters here. Okay, okay, let's do one thing. Now I'm going to create another constructor called 1. So here I'm passing the value 22. But still you see now it is throwing the error. Okay, the reason behind this is like whenever we are creating any constructor, default constructor, and we do not have any other parameters constructor. Okay. Otherwise, you are not taking charge of creating the constructor. Okay. Then JVM, what it does is like internally it will create the constructor. Okay. But you started creating the constructor. Now you see I have created the parameters constructor. Okay. So if I have only parameters constructor, it will not throw any other because we have created the constructor and we are passing the parameters. But here we are trying to create a default constructor. Okay. So here you see we don't have any parameters in. Now JVM, what it does is like it will stop creating the constructor for you. Okay. It will not create constructor automatically because you have taken charge of creating the constructor. Okay. So you have to, by default, you have to provide the body of this constructor. That's nothing but you have to just create the constructor. So this is what important thing. Okay. So when you start creating the constructor, so you should be responsible of creating the constructor. JVM will stop doing it. Okay. Then I'm going to say that whenever you have a parameters constructor, if you are providing the parameters to that particular constructor, that is fine. Okay. So that's nothing but see, 23 is the value that it's passed as like a int A and it will be assigned to this A value. This is nothing but initialization of instance value. Now, the second thing is like, I'm trying to create a constructor. Now you see, I'm just creating an object followed by the constructor, which is default constructor. In this case, what happens is like JVM will throw the error if you are not providing any constructor here. Okay. So why? The reason is like now you have created the parameters constructor and you are trying to create the default constructor, but you are not providing body to this default constructor. Then what it does is like it's going to throw the error. Okay. It says like constructor is undefined. Okay. The constructor you have created, but it is undefined. In this case, you have to take the responsibility of creating the constructor. Okay. So this is important thing. And by default, you see now, I'm just removing this constructor, which is parameters constructor, and I'm removing this code also. Now you see you don't have any issues. I'm going to remove this one also. Okay. So I'm not creating any set of constructor. Now JVM feels like, okay, this guy is not taking up the creation of default constructor. I'll create internal. Okay. Internally, the code will be like right click source. This is another way of creating the constructor. Okay. Constructor. I'll just generate the constructor. So now you see, it's not throwing any error. It is optional. It is optional. Okay. What is optional? When you're creating the object along with the default constructor, if you're not providing any constructor in the program or in the file, that is optional. But in case you see, what is the main catch is like, now you have a set of a constructor with some parameters in it. Okay, now it is throwing the error. Okay, so let me do one thing. Now it's going to create a constructor with this values. Okay, so I'm going to take a comma b. So here I'll say a is equals to I. So this is nothing but initializing the instance variable. B is equals to j. Okay, now it will throw the error because now you have created the parameters constructor and you are creating the default constructor here, but you are not providing body to it. Okay, so there is no constructor in it. Now create a constructor with this. So now it's like we are able to. What are we trying to do now? We are able to get this error once this error is resolved after creating the constructor. Okay, so the basic thing is like, why do we need to create a constructor? Is like to initialize the instance variable. This is first thing. Okay, and second thing is like, if you started creating the constructors by your own, then you have to create body for, you have to create a constructor and you have to provide body. I mean, like it's like optional if you want to provide the body or not, but you have to create the constructor. If you are defining the constructor here as like default constructor or parameters constructor, then you should feel the responsibility of providing the or creating the constructor in that particular program. Okay, so this is one thing. This is very important. In interviews, they are going to ask you like, but I mean, like how this constructor works, and they would ask you in this case, like, if you are not creating any default constructor, will JVM by default create the constructor? Yes, that is yes, but you have to give the another condition is like, if we have created some other constructor, okay, parameters constructor along with the default constructor, then we should provide the, or else we should create the constructor in the class. Okay, so if you are defining anything here as like default constructor and parameters constructor, then you should feel the responsibility of creating the constructor. Otherwise, it will throw the error. Okay, because it stopped creating the constructor. JVM stops creating the constructor. Then you should feel the responsible of creating the constructor. So these are the errors that we get. Okay. Are you clear about this, guys? So why do we use constructor, and what is default constructor, and what is parameters constructor?
Yes, you got.
So yeah. So here now you see we got these values. And other thing is like, guys, here you see if you're not providing anything here, it doesn't throw any error. Okay, it doesn't throw any error. We did not define any. So we have a constructor here, but we did not define it here. So now what I'm trying to do is like, I'll try to print the values of A and B. Okay. So we did not get any values here. Okay. So, but I'll try to call them here. Okay? So default values of it. See, A is equals to 0 and B is equals to 0. Okay. So in this case, what is happening though? The default values of instance variables are like, what are the default values of instance variables in case of into data type is like 0. Float is like 0.0. Okay. So Boolean is like false. So these are the default values that it's going to provide. Okay. If you're not initializing the instance values, instance variables along with the values are not passing as like a constructor values, then what it does is like it's going to consider the default values. Okay. So now you see I'm going to pass it as like 45. I'm going to execute it. But we did not set any statement here. Okay. So this is like default. We don't have any default constructor. That is the reason why this constructor is not called. Now we have a parameters constructor. Let me execute this. Let me see. A is equals to 12, B is equals to 45. Okay. So this one is first making a call to this constructor and it's providing the values. Okay. 12, 45, 23, 34. Okay. So please work on this, guys. This is very important and you need to understand why do we use the constructors. Now you got it right. So we are passing the parameters here. Because of this, we are passing the values of the parameters. So these parameters are taken and these are getting initialized here. So which values we are initializing, which variables we are initializing? We are initializing the instance variables. Okay. So these are called instance variables and we got the values here. And I'm trying to print it. Okay. So we'll see another program. Now what happens in case like if we have the variable name same as like in the parameters, whatever we are passing as the variable name. Okay. So the same variables like here it is like int A, int B. Here we have like int A, int B. In that case, how do we differentiate? So we use a keyword called this. Okay. So keyword called constructor. Okay. Now you see, I've written string name, int age, and string location. Now simply what I'm going to do is like I'm going to create a constructor with the names. Okay. So thumbs is equals to new constructor, passing it as like parameter. So now we see we don't have any issues because we did not create any default parameters constructor. Okay. Now JVM understands like this guy is hasn't created any parameters constructor, so I should create constructor internally. Okay. So now what happens is like now I'm going to pass the parameters. Now you see. So what happens in this case? Okay, now it will throw the error. So boss, you have defined the constructor, but where is the body of that constructor? You did not create it. So you have to create. Okay, I've created this. Now you see, you got this values. But what I want to do is like I want to put the same name as the instance variable. Okay, whatever variables that we have given, so I want to put it the same. Now what I'm going to do is like name is equals to name. Observe carefully. Age is equals to okay. Now JVM is getting confused like which one is see now it says like qualify left hand side, qualify right hand side. Okay, the assignment of variable age has no effect. So it is like confused now. So which value that you want to assign, like what is this the value that you want to take it as like a parameter, or is this the value that you want to take it as like parameter? How can I differentiate between this instance variables and this parameter value, the parameters that I'm passing as like a arguments? Okay. So what it does is like it will get confused and it will give the see here it is like it's giving the warning. Okay, it's kind of like a warning it is giving. So how do we differentiate now? How do we differentiate the current class instance or the value that we are getting as part of like a constructor. Okay, to differentiate this two things. Okay, so identify the instance variables of this particular class, the current class. We have to use a keyword called this. Now it understands. Okay, so this, when I said this dot name, now it is like taking this value as like a variable and it's assigning this value. Whatever we are getting value as a parameter, this will be get assigned here. Okay, so this represents the current class instance. Okay, so this represents the current class instance, the current class member. Okay, now you see this dot location. So here I want to just create a method, public void display. Display. Again, I'm going to take a theme in that whatever I have taken. Okay, let me just take these things to save our time. Name, I see name, age, location. Now you call with the help of the constructor. So if it is like a non-static method, then we have to use the, what do we need to do? We need to create an object and we have to call with the help of an object. Okay, so method is like called with the help of that object. Now go and execute this. Now you got the values right. So you come 30 and hello. So this is applicable only when we have this name, whatever we are passing as like a parameter to this constructor are similar to the instance variable names. Okay, so this and this are similar. Then in this case, what we do is like we use this keyword. Okay, so this keyword will help you to differentiate between the values that we are trying to assign to this variable. Okay, so now it is like it will treat it as like a current class instance. So this dot name is equals to name. If it is like different thing, we need not to worry about. Okay, we need not to worry about it. So you can remove this keyword. Okay, so this will help you to differentiate between the parameters what we are passing as part of constructor with the instance variables. Okay, so now you see we don't have anything, but when we remove this one, and here also we remove this one, now it will give the same set of warnings here. It will say that qualify left hand side, qualify right hand side. So which one you want to qualify? Okay, so for this reason, what we do is like we use this keyword. Okay, so now go and execute. Will
You have given there under the object that constructed dot display.
Okay.
That what is
sorry, can you be louder? I'm not able to.
you have given there that constructor dot display details.
Yeah.
What is the
So this is the object, right? So this is the object. Along with the object, I'm trying to call this method. Because this method is non-static method, so we are calling with the help of an object. Okay. Anything which is not a static, then we have to use the object. Okay, we cannot call them directly. So for example, if you want to call this particular name now, okay. So name, how do we call it now? So with the help of a object. When I directly give the name, so for example, name. See, now it's going to throw the error, make it as like static. Okay, so it will say that cannot make a static reference to the non-static field name because this method is like static, right? So this method is like static. Non-static methods cannot be like non-static methods or non-static members. Anything which is non-static cannot be called inside the static because as we discussed, like static things will be loaded during the class loading. Okay, but now you see when we are creating the object, this object will be created after the class is loaded. Okay. So now you see, I want to access the same variable name with the help of an object. Now I don't have any issues because we are calling the members of that particular class with the help of an object. Okay. So non-static cannot be called within the context of static. So if you make this one as like static, we don't have any issues. Now you can directly call them. It will not throw any error. Okay, now it's calling this constructor example 3 instance variable. Okay, you try to execute it. See what is happening here. We can still call this one before this one. But what you get here is like it will throw the null value because you are not initializing the instance variable. Okay, so after this line, before this lines, make some difference here. Okay, so because here you see, first it will go and try to call this one because this is static and we don't have any value assigned it. So after creating the constructor is like initializing the instance variables. So now I got the name value here. When I print it, now this name will show you the three constants. Okay, so this is the difference between
Okay.
static and non-static. Okay. Okay, let's go and see another program. This is quite interesting. We'll talk about like, for example, code. For example, I want to call the constructor within a constructor. Okay, so we have few keywords that we are going to use as part of constructors or inheritance. Okay, so this is like it will represent the current class instances. Super is like it will represent the parent class instances. Okay, so this two brackets, like open and close bracket, will represent the current class constructor. Okay, current class constructor. Super is like parent class constructor. Okay, so super, you just ignore super for now. I'll discuss about this super keywords when we are talking about inheritance. Okay, so there I'll show you like how do we use this super keywords. For now, you concentrate on like this will help you to identify the current class instance, and this open and close bracket will help you to identify the current class constructor. Okay, so if you want to call the current class constructor, then we have to use this open and close brackets. Okay, so let's go and create a small program here. So what I'm going to do is like I'll create constructor. Here I'm going to say this is how can we make a constructor call. Okay, so I'm showing you that. I'll create two more constructors here. So here I'm going to have int a. Let's take some variables int a, comma b. Int a, comma int b. So one param constructor. This is one parameter constructor, and this is two parameter constructor. Okay. So now I'm going to create main method. I'll try to create the objects. Okay. Constructor, new constructor. This is default constructor 1, and this is 2. And here we have 10. We have 10, comma 20. Go and execute it. So what we did, so just we have created a default constructor, one param constructor, and two param constructor. I'm passing the parameters. So this is called constructor overloading. Okay, constructor overloading. Constructor, see, now we have a same constructor name with different parameters. Okay, so this is called constructor overloading. What it does is like at the runtime, it will check for this particular parameters. If it finds this parameter, like you have one parameter, and this parameters, like here we have created a constructor for that particular constructor defined. Here we are defining the constructor and have created this. So based on the parameters, okay, based on the parameters, it will call this particular constructor. For example, you see I have created 3 param constructor. Okay, so here I'm going to create a 3 param constructor. But I'm not defining the constructor. I've just created it. I'm not calling that constructor. For example, now you see I'm going to execute this. You'll get default 1 param and 2 param. But here you see it's not throwing any error because we did not define this constructor. Okay, it's not finding that particular constructor anytime here. So if you define this, for example, you see 10, comma 20, comma 30. Okay, it's going to overload. Overload in the sense what it does is like it will check for the number of parameters defined here, and it will go and try to find out that particular constructor. If it finds this, then it's going to execute it. Okay, now you see it's going to execute 1, 3. Oh, sorry, 3, 2. Okay, yes. You have 3 parameters and you got the body here. Okay, constructor call is like, it's going to this particular line and it's going to execute it. Now you see 10, comma 20. and here it is going, and it is finding this constructor here and it's executing this. Okay, so this is called constructor overload. Okay, so we'll take the same set of example for the constructor chain. Okay, how do we the constructor chain? I'll close all of them. I'll open this one. So what I'm going to do is like, I'll just cut this, paste it here. I'll put 1, 2. Now you see, so based on this, first it will come here, it will execute the default constructor. It will come here, it will check for the parameters constructor. It can be any sequence. Okay, it's not that sequence we have to maintain. It can be anything. You can put this here and this here. But the thing is like, it will call based on that. It will come to this line, it will go and try to execute this first. And this is like, it will come to this line, it will go and try to match the constructor. So it find it, it's going to execute that. It will get the result as like 3, 1, default 2. Okay, so 3, 1, default 2 parameters. So it's all based on us. Okay, so how do we want to put it? So generally, it's like best practice to have them in sequence so that we can understand easily. Okay, this is like constructor overload. Now, what is constructor chaining? Constructor chaining is like we discussed about like this keyword, right? So you see what I'm going to do is like, I'll pass some value here. Constructor chaining is useful when we are trying to create only one constructor, define the one constructor, and we have a multiple constructor created in this line. Okay, now you see. Okay, now you see I'm going to remove everything. So this keyword, this with the bracket, what it does is like, it's going to call the constructor. Now first what it does is like, it will come here. It will come here and it will call this constructor. We have a this of 10. Yes, it will come here and it will call this constructor. Now we have like this comma 10, 20. Yes. So it will go and call this constructor. Okay. It will come to this line. It will see that this is the, this we have like this constructor is with the 3 parameters. It will come here and it will call this constructor. Okay. Nothing but this is a constructor call. Okay. So what is the output that we have here? Like, let's go and execute this program and see what is the output. Say first 3 param, 2 param, 1 param, and default. So only we have created one constructor at a time. So what it does is like, when we are executing this program, so first it will see the default constructor. Yes, we have a default constructor. After this, we have another constructor call, constructor within a constructor. That's the thing, but we are chaining it. Okay, this constructor will call this one. This constructor will call this constructor. This constructor will call this constructor. Finally, it will execute this constructor. It will come back and it will execute this constructor, and it will go back and it will execute this constructor statement dot whatever we have written inside this constructor. And after that, it will come here and it will execute this statement within the default constructor. Then it will terminate. Okay. So earlier we saw that overloading. Okay. Now we are like, this is called constructor chaining. When we are making only default, when we are creating only defining the only default constructor, and we have created multiple constructors and we are calling. So how are we calling this? We are going to use the keyword called this open and close brackets. Within this, we are passing the parameters. Okay, based on these parameters, it will call. This is similar to the program that we are discussing here, but we have created, we have defined multiple constructors here. Okay, so we have defined multiple constructors and we have created multiple constructors here. So based on these parameters, it's going to overload. Okay, but here in this case, it's like, one constructor that I'm creating and I'm calling multiple constructor with the help of this. Okay, so this represents, this open and close bracket represents the current class constructors. Okay, so this is called constructor chaining. Calling constructor within a constructor. Okay, so these are important things, guys. This is like very important in case of like interviews. They're going to ask you like, how do we call the constructor with the help of this open and close bracket? How do we differentiate current class instances, we use this keyword. Okay, so this will be helpful for differentiating the instance variables. So now we saw that how do we initialize the instance variables. We can see the initialization of instance variables with the help of a methods also. Okay, so let's go to it little later. But are you clear with the constructor? Why do we use the constructor?
Yes, sure.
Yes, this is very important because most of the questions will come like definitely at least you can expect 2 questions from constructor. Okay, so what is constructor? Why do we need constructor? Can we create object without constructor? And what is the difference between this keyword and super keyword? This constructor and super constructor. Okay, so this keyword we looked into this keyword. So this keyword will help you to differentiate the instance variables and the parameters that we are passing as part of constructor. Okay, so that is important. And this open and close bracket is like it will help you to call the current class constructor. Okay, so these are the examples, guys. So say I try to explain you what is constructor overloading and how do we create the constructor, like chaining the constructor, and what are default constructor and what are parameterized constructors. Okay. Do you have any doubts, guys?
No, sure.
Okay. So then what is the difference between method and a constructor? See, constructor will not have a return time. Okay, constructor will not have a return time. For example, if you are defining it as like a public, okay, and it's a void, then what happens is like this is not treated as like a constructor. This will be treated as like a, what is that? We have return time. A method will have a return time, but constructor will not have a return time. If you are writing like public void constructor, then it will be treated as like a method. It's not a constructor. So that is the reason why it's not throwing any error. But you see, now it is like a constructor. Okay. So constructor is invoked implicitly. Okay. So when you are not creating any default constructor. For example, you see, I'm just creating constructor. Sample 6. Going here, main method. Sequence is equals to what is happening? So it is invoked internally. Okay, implicitly JVM will create a constructor. Okay, so this is nothing but Java will provide a default constructor. If you are not creating any constructor here. Okay, and the constructor name should be similar to the class name. Okay, so the method, whatever now you see, as we discussed about like the other differences like int A and B. Okay, so public void display int A comma int B. This dot A, again I'm doing the same actions. Okay, what we have done through the constructor, I'm doing with the method. If I go and execute, I don't get anything here because only constructor is created. Now I'm going to call the method with the object. Okay. Then you may ask here, like, what is the difference between these two things? Both of them are doing the same thing, right? But here you see the difference. Constructor during creation of whenever we are creating the object, we are using constructor and we are passing the parameters. Like that's nothing but the instance variables are getting initialized. It's a single statement. But here you see, we are creating the object. After creating the object, we are calling the method and we are passing them as like a parameter. Okay, we are passing them as like a parameter. So both does the same thing, but the constructor, with the help of the constructor, we can initialize the instance variable there itself. Okay, during creation of object. So that is nothing but this is the main difference between both of them. And method will have, like you can see, method will have a return type, but constructor does not have any return type. Okay, so constructor is like you can use the constructor to avoid certain things like object creation also. We can, if you make this private as the constructor as like a private, okay, in that case it will not allow you to create the multiple instance of that particular class. This is very important. Okay, so that we call it as like a singleton classes. Okay, we'll discuss about them little later, but these are the advantages. Now you see, at the next line, we are creating the object and we are trying to call the method with the help of the object and we are passing the parameters here. But here in this case, it is not required. For example, if you have a constructor here, 10, 20. Okay. So here I'm going to create a constructor. This constructor, I'm going to do the same actions. Now you see, both of them are doing the same job, but the thing is like constructor will help you to initialize instance variable during the object creation. After object creation, what we do is like we are going to call the methods. Okay, so this keyword will help you to differentiate between these two. The variables that we have as part of instance variables and the variables are the parameters that we are passing as part of this constructor or method. Okay, so now you see all the three are there. We are using this keyword to differentiate and we are creating constructor and we are calling the constructor. That's nothing but constructor is called when during the creation of the object. Okay, here it's like we are calling the method and we are passing the parameters. Are you clear with this, guys? And we saw the constructor calling within a constructor. The question is like, do we have any return type for the constructor? We don't have any return type for the constructor, but method will have the return type. Method will be called after creating the object, but constructor can be called during the creation of the object. That's the thing about defining the constructor during the creation of the object. Are you clear with this, guys?
Can you please once again explain about the method?
Yeah, method will have, like you can see, method will have the access modifier, return type, and the method name along with the parameters. Okay. So what is the use of method is like to perform a specific logic. For example, if you want to perform some set of actions. So within the class, if you can write anywhere. But the thing is like, if you can segregate them like a components. Okay. For example, if you want to perform some addition, multiplication, division, or any other actions. Okay, if you want to capture some information and if you want to perform only after calling this particular method. So in that case, what you can do is like you can just, now you see what I'm trying to do is like I'm assigning these values and I'm just putting some statements here. So what is my essence of doing this? Like I want to display some values. So how can I do it? Like, so directly I can write these things here, right? So but the thing is like I want to separate them as like put it as like separate component and call that particular component at a time. Okay, after creating the object. Now you see, I'm just creating the object constructor.display. It says like now we are passing this. First it will go and assign these values and it will print the values. Okay. But here what I'm showing is like the difference between method and the constructor is like constructor can also do the same job, but it's like we have a difference here. We are not depending on the object here. Okay. It's kind of like during the object creation itself, we are trying to initialize the instance variables. So here what it is doing is like it's going to perform some actions during the creation of the object. But methods, whatever we are defining as part of like a method, is non-static. Okay, I'm talking about non-static. Static methods that can be called with help of a class name. Okay, with help of a class name. But non-static methods requires a objects. Okay, requires a object. So object dot you can call in whatever you want. Okay, it can be an instance variables or it can be a method that we want to use for certain operations. So the method is like it's a block of a code specifically written to perform some action. Okay, perform some action. Okay, are you clear with this yet?
Yes, yes.
And we have like method name need not be a class name. It can be anything. It can be a class name or without like if whatever you want to give, you can give it. But we have to follow the syntax. Okay, so we have a access modifier, return type, method name, parameter with parameter, without parameter. And this method is explicitly invoked by the object, but constructor is like implicitly invoked. Okay, it does not require any object. So another thing is like method will, if you are trying to create a method, like for example, if you define something as like const.display. So what it says like, it will throw the error. You have to create a method. This is nothing but it's kind of like you have to create a method. So it is creating, like that's the thing. But if you define the constructor like this, what happens? I'll see, I'm going to give one. So Java internally, so now as we discussed, like we have created the parameters constructor. That is the reason why it is showing this particular error. If I comment this line, okay, you don't have a constructor defined here. But in case if you don't have anything, for example, now you see, so internally, implicitly, it will create a default constructor. But in case of method, if method is not defined, this is also default method, right? Default method in the sense it does not have any parameters in it, but it is asking you to create because the purpose of method is different and the purpose of constructor is different. Purpose of constructor is to initialize the instance variables and do some actions on them. But here display is like, see, I'm not like what is this display and all. So when I just give this particular constructor name, for example, you see object. So I'm using the object and trying to call this constructor. It is still showing this is not treated as like a constructor. See, it is asking you to create it as like a method. Okay, so the difference between constructor and the method is like constructor will be invoked implicitly, but method requires object for accessing. Okay, I'm just reverting these things. Are you clear with this, guys?
Yes, sir.
Okay, guys, I'll stop the class here. So tomorrow we'll be talking about like the other OOPS concepts. Okay, so the other OOPS concepts would be like we have inheritance, polymorphism, data abstraction, and data encapsulation. Okay, data abstraction, data encapsulation. Okay, so we are done with class. What is class? What is object? What is method? What is constructor? Then we'll learn about inheritance, polymorphism, data abstraction, and data encapsulation. Okay, so 4 pillars of OOPS concepts are these are the 4 pillars. Okay, but OOPS concepts will be considered as like class and objects also OOPS concepts. So here we looked into like this keyword and this constructor. Okay, so this keyword will help you to differentiate the current class instances, and this constructor will help you to call the current class constructor. Okay, so tomorrow we'll start with inheritance, and probably will like it will take 3 days to complete these concepts. These are very important, and we look into them in detail. We need to understand these are the important things that will be asked in interviews.
Okay, sir.
I shared those programs, guys, and you can find these programs today also. Just uploading these programs. Okay. Structure. Yeah, guys, it's done. Okay, let's meet at 8:30 tomorrow, and we'll discuss other topics. Okay. Thanks for your time, guys. Let's meet tomorrow.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.